What happens when the life you built, the one that defines you, disappears almost overnight? And I'm not talking gradually and not by choice, but all at once. And you're left asking the question that most people avoid: if you strip away all of the titles, who are you really? Welcome back to the Second Voice podcast, where we uncover the conversations that leaders don't have out loud. I'm your host, Louisa Hogan, and today we're exploring what happens when success collapses and the identity that you built around that goes with it. And my guest exploring that with me today is the lovely Ray Martin, also known as the Daily Explorer, and he is an entrepreneur and an award-winning business leader. And as a coach, mentor, facilitator, speaker, writer, and mindfulness teacher, he is a torchbearer for greater human consciousness. And I cannot wait to explore that, Ray. He's also a marathon runner, and so am I. So I feel like I'm a kindred spirit. And he's also a fundraiser. And he's on a mission to empower people to live authentically and to bring more joy and happiness in the world. Ray, thank you so much for joining me today. It's so lovely to have you here with us.
Thank you, Louise, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. And I didn't realise you were a marathon runner too, so that's good.
Yeah, I've run a couple of marathons, so I feel connected to you from afar because you're in London, aren't you?
Yeah, that's right, just on the edge of London. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, tell us a little bit about your story, Ray. I know I've given a little bit of an intro, but there's obviously so much more to that. Tell us your story, and I'm intrigued to know because I've given people a taster of what happens when you lose your identity. So let's explore that. How have you experienced that in your journey? What brought you to where you are today?
Yeah, brilliant. I feel like I'm sitting in the privileged position of knowing what it's like to actually enact the fantasy that a lot of people I've spoken to have, which is, I wonder what would happen if I could just give all this up and just go AWOL and wander around the world for a while. You know, what would that be like?
Yeah.
And that was the invitation that life put in my lap. I was all my life when I was at school, I was just following what I call the off-the-shelf life story. You know, my parents had said, Ray, if you want to be happy as an adult, you've got to do several things. You've got to find a good wife, get a good job and career, get a house, get a mortgage, have kids, and all of that equals happiness. So that was the blueprint of life I was following. I didn't question it or say, is that really truly going to deliver happiness or anything like that? Mm-hmm. I just got on with it until I reached my early 40s and became CEO of a company I founded, won an award from the Daily Telegraph in England for being business leader of the year. So I couldn't have got any higher up the ladder I'd built. But I'd sort of got to the top of that ladder and stood on the wall and gone, oh my God, I didn't realize it was going to be like this. Is this the wall that I really wanted to climb? I think I might have climbed the wrong one.
Yeah.
And I was married and life just felt out of sync with my soul somehow. I wasn't unhappy. It was more like a dull discontentment. And it just never stopped gnawing away. And I think the woman I was married to could see that, and it was very unsettling for her. Mm-hmm. But anyway, to cut a long story short, one day, after about 10 years of building a business together, she was my business partner and being married, she came back and said, quite suddenly and abruptly, I'm leaving you and I'm leaving the company. And it was the beginning of a massive change that I had no idea was coming on that day. And my father got very ill and passed away at more or less the same time. So within 3 or 4 months, I was out of my home, out of my marriage. The company that I'd built was being dismantled, and my dad had gone. And I felt like I was standing in this bomb crater of destruction, literally turning 360 degrees and just seeing all this rubble everywhere and thinking, how am I ever going to rebuild my life? I really thought life was over at that point and I could never be happy again. I'm delighted to say I am happy again, but at that point it was dark, very, very dark. And so a long journey began. I didn't anticipate it. Friends recommended I took a sabbatical for 6 months and just got my head clear and went to a different place. And I didn't have children, so I didn't have to think about that. And that was fortunate at the time. And so I did that, but it didn't go according to plan. And, one thing led to another. And I ended up staying longer. And then that led me to start a fundraising organization in Asia where I was doing my sabbatical. And that then led me to start working with some organizations. And in the end, I lived out of my backpack for 14 years. I never imagined I ever would. And then so many people who I met during that period, and they heard what I was doing, they said, They said, "Can I give you my email address, Ray?" And I say, "Why is that?" Because they said, "Well, if you ever wrote a book about this story, we'd really like to read it." And I laughed and I said, I'm not a writer. I'm doing this to heal myself and find an answer to the question, what does living life true to myself look like?" That was the question I was trying to answer, because I got that inspiration from Bronnie Ware, who's an Australian nurse. I mean, you probably know her. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
she's famous in Australia, I think. She wrote the
Mm-hmm.
top 5 regrets of the dying, and the number one regret was, I wished I'd lived my life true to myself. That's what people say on their deathbed.
Yeah.
And when I heard that and read that, which I read at a time where I was really low, looking for answers, I thought, gosh, I need to go and find out what living life true to myself looks like, on a daily basis. I had no idea. So that quest began and then eventually got answered, but little by little, bit by bit, not just one big answer. Pieces of the jigsaw fell into place over a long period of time.
Wow. What a
Yes.
journey. 14 years. That's
14 years,
incredible.
yeah. It took me all over the place. 28 different countries, a lot of it in Asia, but I lived in Poland for 3.5 years as well, and Spain for a bit, and different
Wow.
places, yeah.
That's an amazing, amazing journey. And, I mean, as you know, this is a podcast about self talk.
Yeah.
At the time that you were going through all of that, at the start of that journey, you know, you obviously, I mean, you've briefly shared some of the internal struggles that you were having. Was any of that stuff that you couldn't say out loud at the time? Were you ashamed of talking about it out loud, or was it so confusing internally that you couldn't articulate it? What was going on in that regard?
It was a mixture of all of that, actually. But yeah, I did have a lot of guilt and shame about my failure as a husband. I'd been sort of rejected out of the marriage I was in. And while I'm not saying I'm 100% responsible for that, I could see my part in it, definitely. And I sort of did have this feeling of failing and not being good enough and things like that, which is something I've come to learn since is quite common,
Mhm.
especially highlighted by the work that Brene Brown does on vulnerability.
Yes, yeah.
And so I was confronting those issues of feeling that guilt and shame and not really knowing how to put it into words or who to share that with, and also hoping that just by being in an Asian country and in the more relaxed environment that brings, and that it would somehow affect my psychology, but it didn't. I was just moving my meat and bones to a place where I could experience my dysfunction in a bit more of a relaxed state and a bit more comfort for less money.
Yeah.
But I was just still the same messed up person inside my head. And
Yeah.
when I said this to a fellow traveller one day after about 5 months, he said, have you ever considered doing a Vipassana meditation retreat? And I had no idea what that was when he mentioned it. I said, what is that? He said, well, you go into a monastery and you sit with Buddhist monks for 10 days in silence, and they teach you how to meditate, and you get insight into yourself through your mind and your thinking and through observing your breath. I didn't know what the hell he was talking about on one level, but the energy of him was so kind of compelling, and I could just sense it was when I started to notice my intuition in play. It was things like that. And that was one of the developments that came on early in the journey. I followed that and I did that Vipassana. It was a game changer.
Yeah. I feel like the universe brought you what you
Yeah,
needed at the exact right
it
time.
really did. It
Yeah.
was like a lifeline. It was really, really a game changer. I left that monastery completely grounded, calm.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you had a volume dial on the side of your head, when I went in, it was 10 out of 10. And when I walked out, it felt like it was now 1 out of 10.
Yeah.
Knowing it,
Us.
it never goes fully quiet, of course. But
Yeah, of course not. And I so relate because I've been on my own little spiritual journey over the last few
oh, wow.
years, and I've been doing Kriya yoga and meditation, and I know exactly what you mean. Accessing that calm and that intuition that I wasn't accessing before. And for me, it's turning down the analyzer. That's what I call it. It's
Mm,
like I've got this little knob, and it turns down the analyzer for me in that time, and it's so so good because I'm always amazed at how when you are as an entrepreneur or a leader, a CEO, how your analyzer is always on and always on and always on. And then for me, it was always so fear based. I had a lot of fear around failure and perfectionism, and how you can sort of train that out of yourself in many ways. But you have to be able to access that quiet, right?
yeah. It's a real gift, actually, being able
Yeah.
to do that because I started to get a new kind of thinking arising in me that didn't
Mm-hmm.
feel like it was coming from my logical brain, more like from my heart, actually, which is
Yeah.
hard to sort of say in a conversation like this because
Yeah.
so it's all just going on inside.
Yeah.
But it just had such a different energy feel to it
Yeah.
and
Amazing.
more wisdom in it as well. You know, felt like
Yeah.
it belonged. It was my wisdom because I noticed in the early days of my trip, I couldn't make decisions. I was always asking other people, "What should I do? Should I do this or that?" And they'd say, "I don't know." You know, I thought
Mm-hmm.
I need to let go of this idea that other people can decide for me. I need to trust my own wisdom somehow. I
Yeah.
saw that as a need that I hadn't really fully developed.
Yeah. Uh, what strikes me too, and there are people who would be listening who are very tied to their identity or their label or their
Yeah,
title, right?
yeah,
And I've been there. I've been a CEO, and then you become very tied to that title. And then
yeah,
some people go through situations where that title no longer applies. And then you're left like, who am I without the title? What advice can you give to people out there who might be facing that or who might be so attached to the title and so afraid of losing it? What's some practical advice that you can give to somebody, so that they don't have to go on a 14-year journey
yeah.
and and maybe start on a smaller journey to recognize that that title is maybe not all that necessarily?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've got so much to say on this. I better keep it short
Great.
because I know we've only got a limited time. But there's a coach in America called Tony Robbins. Most
Mhm.
people have heard of him. He's world famous, and I love one of the things that he says in his books and his work, which is you're not just the actor in your life; you're the director and the script writer too. You occupy
Mhm.
all of those positions, and so if your character, in my case, it was Ray the businessman in London. If your character is in a story and you don't like how that character's showing up in the story, you can rewrite their parts of their personality. You can rewrite their dialogue. You can change the scenes, or you can kill off the series. You've got loads of options when you're in all three seats. And that didn't really strike me as being fully true in my gut until I came to Australia just before I started this journey and got offered the chance to literally act in a play. I had no experience. I got my friends in Cairns suggested I went to the theatre and I got invited to an audition for a play about a British member of Parliament. And I thought I was going to be asked if I got the part to play him. But it turned out that the director thought I'd be really cool in another role, the central comedic character of the play called George. And I had no experience at all of acting, but they offered me the lead role in the play. I said, "Are you kidding me? I mean, I've got no experience. I'm a high risk." They said, "No, we think you'd be perfect, and we'd help you rehearse and get ready for it." So I went through that entire process of letting go of being Ray the businessman for 3.5 months, and just stayed in Australia to learn how to become this character, George. And then as I was flying home to England after the very successful play had finished, I suddenly felt this dread in my body again, going back to being Ray. And I thought, what's that about? What is that? Why am I feeling so much dread? And then suddenly dawned on me on the aeroplane flying, I went, oh my God, Ray the businessman's a character I'm playing. It's not real. It's someone I've learned how to become. And it never really
Yeah.
dawned on me until I actually was in a play and had to learn a character's voice, his walk, his clothes, everything. And
Yeah.
and it's not fixed. That's the main advice I've got for people. It's not fixed. It's only fixed by the amount of limiting beliefs we're holding, because it's completely within your power to create that any way you wish if you're the scriptwriter, director, and actor. So I think
Yeah.
it's a shift in thinking. It's a shift in perspective.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would say to most people, don't make a huge leap at once if it's too dangerous. I'd say do some tiny experiments, as Anne-Marie Lecomte says in her book. Choose some tiny experiments to be out of character for a bit and see what that feels like
Yeah.
until you get more confident with it.
That's such great advice. And my husband always says, "Hold reins loosely."
Yeah, nice.
and and when I first met him, I'm a completely different person to when I first met him, and he's seen my evolving journey. But I didn't
Yeah,
understand what he meant by that. I'm like, "What do you mean can't like hold reins tightly? I have to hold the reins tightly."
yeah,
But what I've learned is that hold the reins loosely is very much a way for you to allow your true self to emerge in
Yeah.
real time, because when you're holding on so tightly, right, like you just don't allow anything else but the persona that you are in, the character, as you say, that you are
Yeah.
in, to be there, and you just don't open up your world to all of the possibilities and to allow yourself to grow out of that too.
Yeah, exactly. And if you look at some seasoned actors, I can't think, like someone like Kate Blanchett, I think is Australian.
Yeah.
She has played so many different characters. Her range is incredible. She's not typecast herself to one sort of character like Hugh Grant in England has done, as the foppish romantic in Four Weddings and a Funeral. I mean, I think he's made some steps recently, but he was
Yeah.
always this same character in all the
Same.
stories he
Yeah.
played.
But we love that.
Yeah, we do. We kind of do. I mean, it is a sort of perhaps not a good metaphor, but I thought to myself when I was thinking about this, I
Yeah.
thought, oh, I don't want to be like Ross in Friends, who's
Yeah.
always thought of as Ross from Friends, no matter what he's
Yeah.
done since.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so true. And look, you're giving me lots to think about too. I mean, just last week I was at a fundraising dinner and I was invited by a client. And when I got there, there were just so many people there from, I call it my past life, my past CEO life. I've had my own business for 10 years, but before that I was CEO, and I ended up winding up an organization. I thought nobody would employ me again after I wound up that organization. Who wants a CEO that will wind up an organization, right? And then it led me on this journey for 10 years of having my own business. But I went to this event and there were clients there and people I worked with in that life. And it was so strange because it held up this mirror to me, and I felt myself creeping into that persona that I was then. And then I held up this mirror and I'm like, wow, like this is not who you are anymore. And you don't need to step back into that, because the person you are now is what feels right for you right now. But it's so tempting, when you're
Yes.
faced with it, to, feel like you have to keep up that facade of, the person that they used to know. It's like the strangest thing that we do that, and we hold on to that, but you have to learn to come out of that in a way, don't you?
Yeah, you do. You'll like this because you're a runner. It's like when you get a new pair of running shoes, you put your
Yes.
brand new shoes on for the first time. You think, "Oh God, I just want my old ones back on. They're
Yeah.
much better." And
Yeah,
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 they're
yeah,
sort
yeah.
of worn out and they've done the miles, but they just feel more comfortable and they feel more you, don't they? But the new
Yeah.
ones take a couple of days before they become your shoes, really.
Yeah. Right. I know, like in reading about you and looking up, your work, I've seen you talk about you becoming your own observer.
Mm,
What does that actually look like in practice? And particularly when you're in the middle of chaos or in the middle of high pressure or in the middle of something collapsing,
yeah.
how can somebody be their own observer when they feel like they just need to control and hold on tightly?
Yeah.
What's your advice for that?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I learned. My first experience of it was in the monastery with the monks doing the Vipassana retreat, because there you're in the perfect conditions to observe your own mind and what your thoughts do and how they drive your feeling and how that drives your behavior. So a simple example might be if I'm having an argument with my partner at home and she says something that I find annoys me and makes me, not makes me, but a feeling of anger is inside me. Doing that unmindfully would be, God, what you just said made me really angry, which is
Mm.
not true because the other person can't do that. And it's putting the blame and power of the, or assigning blame to the other person.
Mhm.
Whereas becoming your own observer, you could notice that feeling as it's physically arising in your body before you speak. And you could take half a second and you could sort of say something instead. I notice as I'm listening to you that I've got this feeling of anger rising up in me. And I just want to have a moment while I think about what that's about, if that's okay. Just pause for a second. I just want to. And
Yep.
then you've then got a moment to really think. And yeah, I think it reminds me of a situation I had a few years ago when something didn't go my way, and just bringing up that feeling for me here or something like that. And I'm sorry that I'm being angry, but this is what's happening where I am.
Mhm.
And it
Yeah.
creates a bit of space, a bit of compassion for the other person, can understand you. It's not about them. And it never is about the other person, even though we love to think it is, but it never is.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean. Becoming your own observer gives you that third person position to look at yourself from outside and go, almost I could say, I see Ray right now is feeling some anger.
Yeah.
I'm trying to work out what's going on inside him if I was narrating it.
Yeah. And you
Yeah,
know what I love about that too is the minute that you do that with compassion, it actually creates a moment where the other person can respond with compassion too.
yeah,
Because, very often we spiral either at work or with personal relationships, we spiral with that feeling and it escalates, and somebody is only going to respond with resentment when you're responding with resentment. And as you say, it's never about the other person. You hold on to those emotions and we replay those emotions over and over and over. And it doesn't allow us to have the compassion and also recognize as the observer that that's my ego talking. And people hate hearing that because ego means, oh, I'm self-inflated. I don't mean ego in that way. It's that inner part of you that is trying to protect you, and it tries to protect you by telling you that this is dangerous, this is shameful, you hold on to guilt, you know, all of those things. And there's a wonderful book by Dr. Hawkins called Letting
oh yeah,
Go, which is
yeah,
so, so
okay,
good. And
yeah,
it talks about this sort of thing too, right? But I
yeah,
love what you say. It's about, becoming an observer and then responding with compassion, right? And people can apply that at work too.
yeah, exactly. So it's a practice. It's not a sort of an intellectual skill. It's something you have to actually practice because it takes a high level of awareness to pause because you've got to notice those feelings arising in your body before they get to your mouth and be able to interrupt that process, which is quite counterintuitive, and none of us really practice that.
Yeah.
And then you
And
get better at doing it.
it's challenging too because it's so instant, right?
It
It's
is, isn't
so
it?
instant. It's like an
Yeah,
instant reaction. So, and then you've got to be careful too that you don't start feeling feelings of shame to your instant reaction and recognizing that all of that is so natural and it's just a
yeah,
practice that you have to get better at. It's
yeah,
not a shameful thing that you're doing, right? It's just an
yeah,
absolutely normal
correct.
thing.
Correct.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that's it. So it was one of the when I was writing the book about the journey I was talking about, my
Hmm.
editors asked me to write the final chapter of what was all the knowledge and wisdom gained from those years. And I came up with these 6 rules for happiness. And rule number 3 was become your own observer. That's why it's in there. It was one of the
Yeah.
6 rules.
Amazing. And it's so true. And I love that. I think it's such good advice. And it's a lot of, there's such overlap with what you're talking about with the stuff that I do with my
Yeah,
clients. So,
brilliant.
observing and anchoring yourself and naming that emotion. Emotions
Yeah,
pass in 60 to 90 seconds. People
yes,
think that they go on for, oh, well, I'm still angry from 3 weeks ago. No, your emotion has actually passed, but you're holding on to that and you're replaying it. And that's why you still feel angry. But
yes.
if you allow yourself to observe and then it passes, right? So it's such good advice that you got there. So you did touch on earlier when you were touching on when you were still that CEO winning awards, you were touching on how you were feeling the sense of unhappiness, but you maybe couldn't put your finger on it. What are the signals that people will ignore? Like, can you talk to me about that signal a little bit deeper? Because somebody listening now might be getting their little touches of that signal, but might not have put their finger on it yet. Can you tell me
Yeah.
more about what that signal was inside of you?
Yeah, I can. I mean, how I remember it was a mixture of things that seemed quite trivial, but things that seemed really deep. They're all mixed in together. So, for example, one of the ways it showed up for me, I was like late 30s, early 40s. I was putting on a lot of weight. I was losing my physical wellness. I'd become a comfort eater, I was overeating and I was aging much. I've got a picture of me age 40 with my father in his garden, and we looked more like twin brothers than father and son. And when I saw that picture, it shocked the hell out of me. And I thought, why is this happening? Because since I went on this journey and since I've sort of changed the way I'm living life, let's say, I've never been healthier. I run marathons. I'm sort of, I feel like I'm aging in reverse almost a little bit. And I'll be 66 on my birthday this year.
You don't
And
look
I
66,
know,
right?
I know. If I look at pictures of when I was, say, 40, I look much older then, much
Wow.
more worn out. So that was one manifestation. And then in others, it just was a kind of it was always felt like it was clamping my mood of optimism, because I knew I was kind of living a comfortable life and not pushing into some of the areas I really wanted to go, to have more experiences. I I'm not a person. This is different for everyone, but I don't value material wealth particularly. I don't like owning lots of stuff, and I did. I was married to someone who loved it, so we owned loads of stuff and had lots of high status material possessions, but they didn't really do much for me. And so I was
Yeah.
sort of, I feel like I was putting on a performance rather than really being me.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. There were signs, in other
yeah, there,
words.
there were
There
signs,
were
yeah,
signs.
energy and all sorts of
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
things. Yeah, yeah, just generally there.
And you touched on your book and your 6 rules for happiness.
Yeah.
I, I imagine you can tell us about those 6 rules, but if there was one in particular that was the hardest to accept or live by, what was the hardest one for you?
Um, oh, that's a good question. I guess I've never thought of them as hardest to easiest. They're
We
all
ask the
pretty
hard hitting
challenging.
questions here on the
But
second
I'd
voice.
say I'd say the first one, the first rule for the 6 rules is
Yeah.
to build a solid core of self-awareness. If you don't have that, you can't do anything else. You have to have like a solid platform that gives you, when you sit down in a quiet space to wisely reflect on what's going on, it gives you an update and information about where you're at regarding things like, am I living according to my values? What are my values? And am I living them every day in every choice I'm making? Yes or no? How can I do that more? What's my vision? Where's the picture of what life I'm headed towards? And am I step by step moving in that direction, or am I moving away from it? What's going on with that? What's my purpose? Why am I doing all of this? And is my why the right why? And am I getting enough evidence that I'm on track with that? What beliefs do I hold about life that are really empowering me right now, and what beliefs are holding me back? What beliefs am I operating to, and can I shift any of them slightly, even, that would enable me to take more risks or do something a bit more courageous or something more in line with my values? How are my relationships with people? Am I building purposeful, powerful, sustainable relationships that are going to see me through my life? Because I don't know about how it is for you, Louise, but I've never really had to apply for a job or anything ever in my life. Everything that's ever come to me has come through friends or people that I know who've offered, who's come towards me and said, here's an opportunity. And that's happened because of the investments I've made in connecting with that person in our relationship and staying true to that and putting
Yeah.
the energy into it. So I can see that's worked for me really well. So those are
Yeah.
that's a flavour of some of the rules.
Yeah.
But they're all challenging. There's no easy ones, because it's easy to give up and it's easy to get a bit despondent, especially in the current economic climate and with world chaos going on. It's easy to get into a mood where you think none of it's worth it, but it really is.
Yeah. Yeah. That pervading fear. It always come back down to fear with me. If I'm ever stuck or feeling
Yeah,
disheartened or unmotivated, it always comes back to when I really dig into it and have that awareness and,
yeah,
dig in and think about it. It always comes back to fear for me every time.
yes,
And, you know, uh, I think a lot of, especially being an entrepreneur in leadership, is about letting go of fear and surrendering to what is around you and accepting that this is where you are, right?
yeah,
And
right,
people find that very, very difficult. People
yeah,
find that very, very difficult.
yeah. They do,
Yeah.
they do.
For leaders who haven't had a breakdown or haven't had a huge upheaval like you've had, but maybe feeling disconnected or stuck or are hearing or seeing the signs in their life that you've mentioned, what's the honest starting point for them so that they don't have to go through everything falling apart first to start fixing it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things I'd say to that. One is, find someone to work with and talk to. Someone who can be a great sounding board and a deeply understanding and compassionate listener for you. That will help you. just work out what your own thinking and feeling is, because sometimes it's a bit mixed up. I find myself often,
Mm.
until I actually have a conversation with somebody else, I can't really
Mhm.
put my finger on it. But that aside, I'd say for me the best place to start is to say, if I woke up tomorrow and I was facing and heading in the direction of what my best life could look like, what would be in that picture that I'm walking towards? And just start using your imagination and your creativity to start looking at what that would look like, and write things down, make notes, find pictures of things, or just start to
Mhm.
build the picture of what the life is that you're seeking to move towards. Once you've got a little bit of a picture and a sense of that, then that enables you to then say, well, what's the step I could take over the next 4 weeks that would be one tiny step that would take me in that direction? But you
Yeah.
can't really start even thinking that way until you've got a sense of the direction of it. It doesn't have to
Yeah.
be perfect. I mean, I knew when I left the UK to go on my own journey of discovery that I knew I wanted to meet wise people. I knew I wanted to get involved in different communities and find out how life was in different places in the world to the one I'd been brought up in. I knew these things, but I didn't know what they'd look like or where they'd be or anything like that. Life just unfolded in a way that sort of fitted with what I was asking.
Yeah. Well, if
Mm.
it's aligned with where you're supposed to be, it does unfold, I
Yeah, it
find.
does. It really does. It really
Yeah.
does.
I've
Yes.
got this little mantra where, roadblocks are not stop signs. They're just pointing you in the right direction, right? So it's just a
Yeah.
little
Yeah.
sign to say, it's time to go in a different way.
Yeah.
So
Great.
I find that that's really helpful and such good advice, because I think people get overwhelmed with, I have to have it all sorted out and know what all the steps are. But when you know just one step, just the
Yep.
first next one,
Mm.
it all starts to fall into place if you act on it. And then the next thing comes up, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So what are you doing now? It's been the 14 years now, what are you doing? How do you work with people? You've written your book, what's next for you?
Yeah. So now I'm at an interesting moment of change myself again.
Yeah.
I'm 65. According to the UK law, I'll be pensionable in about 8 months' time, which I can't believe it. I just can't quite believe it. But um, my work is in the leadership development and coaching space. So I work with a few organisations as an associate coach, coaching individuals and sometimes members of teams to have a more fulfilling, rewarding, and better experience of themselves as a leader. So it's helping people to improve all the things we spoke about in the 6 rules, their self-awareness, their observer capability. But when someone's practicing all of those things, they show up much, much better as a leader of themselves and others. So that's my joy. I've always enjoyed that. I've always really loved it. I think I'd do it if I got paid for it or not. I still
Yeah.
love doing it. So I do that part time. I'm also involved in events where I get invited to speak about my experiences in the journey described in the book, and people often come to me and ask me to help them with their own journeys around that. So I do some coaching in that space. But I've got a lovely family I'm a member of. I met my partner 3 years ago after I came back from these 14 years. And so I'm in a lovely relationship with my partner. She's got children and grandchildren. And so I now am a member of a big family that I get to do lots of things with I never, ever used to do. And that's brought a lot of
Beautiful.
joy and a lot of happiness to me. And it's nothing to do with work, but it fills a lot of space and time in my life. So I like
Yeah.
that.
I love it's all purposeful. And I
Yeah,
love what
yeah,
a contrast to the titles and the awards,
yeah.
but so much more purposeful and bringing you so much joy and doing good work and helping others. And I just think that's the meaning of life, really, doing the thing that
Correct.
lights you up,
Yeah,
following the light inside of you.
yeah,
And when you do that with love, you're only going to feel love in return, right?
yeah,
That's the
exactly.
whole goal. That's you are living the dream in my world. In my world, you're living the dream. That's
Exactly.
amazing. So where can people find you if they want to work with you, talk to you, buy your book? Where can they go?
Um, I've got there's a website called lifewithoutatie.com, because the book's called Life Without a Tie. So the website lifewithoutatie.com is the best start point. But I know in Australia, I'm sure my book's on Amazon and lots of people buy it there.
Yeah.
And I'm on LinkedIn. That's where a lot of people find me. Those are the best places, I'd say.
Excellent. Well, I'll put that all in the show notes. So
Thank you.
thank you for that. Ray, I'd love to talk to you more. I always say to like my favorite guests, we'll have to bring you back for a second chat. And I
Please
think we
do.
might need to do that with you because I love your story and I love your journey. I think you have such a wonderful message. I think more people in entrepreneurship and in leadership need to hear that because there's so much fear around the title and am I going to achieve? Am I going to be seen as the achiever? Am I going to be seen as a failure? And when it comes down to it, none of that actually matters. What matters is that internal happiness, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
that's
thank
my
you so much for
experience.
joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
My
And
pleasure.
to everyone listening, I think the greatest takeaway for me is that sometimes losing everything isn't the end of who you are. So if you are on that verge of that now, winding up a business, losing a title, deciding on what's next for you, remember that it may not be the end. It may actually be the first time you get to find out who you are inside and embrace that journey. So thank you so much again, Ray. Everyone else, see you next time on the Second Voice podcast. Take care.